Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome to the Cinema Courtroom Show, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial with your host and galactic judge, Makram Mark, presiding. Do not forget to like and subscribe on whatever, and I mean whatever streaming platform that you happen to be listening to, whether it be Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. Because listen, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Don't tell anyone. Shh. Every click on the icon counts. Definitely tell someone because they need to know this. Don't forget to ring the notification bell and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, pigeon, whomever. Because that'll be really helpful as it would increase the viewership numbers and would help this content grow even further than it is right now. Without further ado, let us begin with our review topic for this podcast episode. Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan.
What is the most resilient parasite? Bacteria? A virus? An intestinal worm?
What Mr. Cobb is trying to say.
An idea. Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold in the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks. Right in there somewhere.
For someone like you to steal?
Yes, in the dream state, your conscious defenses are lowered and it makes your thoughts vulnerable to theft. It's called extraction.
Mr. Saito, we can train your subconscious to defend itself from even the most skilled extractor.
How can I do that?
Because I am the most skilled extractor. I know how to search your mind and find your secrets. I know the tricks, and I can teach them to you so that even when you're asleep, your defense is never down.
There are a fair number of amusing science fiction concepts, to say the least. Artificial intelligence, aliens, the multiverse, Back to the Future, frickin' time travel. The list is extensive, to say the least. But has anyone ever heard of a science fiction movie that is centered on the science of dreams? Well, Inception is that movie. And if you haven't seen Inception, it is a relatively old movie. Not that old, mind you, because it was released on July 8th, 2010. But old enough for you to want to catch up with it again. Or keep listening to this podcast and perhaps that might refresh your memory of Inception. Alright, so there are multiple things that I want to talk about from this movie. For one, I want to investigate the technical attributes of Inception and the way that Inception is edited, the audience's engagement with the plot of Inception, what the true meaning of Inception is based on, solely on my own interpretations, where Inception stands in comparison to Christopher Nolan's other work, past and future, whether it be The Dark Knight, Tenet, Interstellar. I'll be exploring all of that. And of course, the finalized verdict of whether or not the Cinema Courtroom would recommend this movie to the average moviegoer. Firstly, and this is the most common storytelling method that Christopher Nolan utilizes for most of his movies, Inception contains a lot of parallel editing. In case you don't know what I mean by Inception containing parallel editing, it's essentially where entirely separate scenes, while isolated, and we see the characters are in very different locations, what happens is that those scenes are edited together to make it seem like the events in those separate scenes are ongoing at the same time. We see that from Inception's speed action sequences to just slow motion, and it really fits in with the technical attributes of Inception because the dreams in the movie are multi-layered. One scene washes over the other, and the moment that the dreams collapse on the protagonist, the editing becomes more intense, and the transitions between scene X and scene Y are harshly rapid. So we got the technical attributes of Inception already established, and its effect on the movie-going audience. How about the plot for Inception? Because hear me out, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. While Christopher Nolan uses technical attributes such as the editing between scenes X and Y to effectively immerse the audience into the story, there's no doubt about that, and of course the intensity of the dream sequences, it is still almost pointless and nothing more than flashes of visual noise to only nail the technical attributes. But if there's no solid plot to back it up, then the movie falls apart. The plot and narrative for Inception, rest assured, is fascinating and backs up those technical attributes, because in the first act of the movie, we are given an appetizer opening. We think that one certain thing is going to occur, and then it happens in a way that we don't expect. Like, that in itself is emphasized in the basic premise for Inception. Dom Cobb, who is played by Leonardo DiCaprio, has the rare ability to enter people's dreams and decipher what is inside their subconscious. And then Christopher Nolan, in true Nolan fashion, flips the script around and goes, you know what, how about we make it that the protagonist who constantly steals dreams from people, how about we make that protagonist earn a chance of redemption by instead planting an idea in someone's mind? And you know what? I think that is cut out for what Inception is trying to convey to the audience. I think that Inception's plot development is at its uttermost prime. And before I move on, I want to talk about a plot point that really stands out to the regular moviegoer watching Inception. Mal's death and what led up to her death. Like, through the dialogue spoken in this movie, we are informed that Cobb is feeling immense guilt for indirectly causing his wife's death. We get to comprehend the full marrow of Cobb's motivation arc. We even know Mal's inner motivations because she had died. Mal is wrestling with mental anguish of the prospect of a reality outside her own dreams. It definitely screws with the audience's mind a bit. Well, more than a bit. That's pretty much the point of the whole movie. It screws them as a whole. Despite how confusing the plot is, the audience still knows that she is delusional and looking out for an escape. They know that Mal, who revealed to Cobb that she filed a letter to their attorney expressing a fear for her life, effectively framing him in the event of her death and emotionally blackmailing him and forcing him no other way than to join her in the dream world. The audience knows that she isn't, as I said, she isn't right in the head. Now that I've established Inception's technical elements, including Inception's storytelling method and the film's plot, which stands out to the average moviegoer watching it, the next thing that I want to talk about is this. What I think the true meaning of Inception is. I think that Inception's true meaning is that your hopes and dreams are more alive than we think, in the sense that it is actively seeking to misguide you into shuffling reality and the widened boundaries of fiction. Reality sucks. Even inside of the very dream world, what occurs in reality can still have an impact on you. The protagonists aren't protected by the walls separating the dreams and the real world, because the truth is that dream is inside your consciousness, and that consciousness is protected by a mortal body living in the real world. You can still die in your sleep. Of course, I would be remiss to not talk about my interpretation for the ending of this movie. I'm just going to warn you that this interpretation isn't out of the ordinary or anything like that, because I'd rather it make sense than just come up with something that is crazy just to score points on the internet. Just letting you know. That being said, and I assume most of you heard this theory multiple times, enough for you to be acquainted with it before, but the ending is what you, as the audience member, makes of it. Christopher Nolan has basically said to us when making this movie, here's a pen and the last page of the story that I'm writing. What we are meant to do is write on it as we please, whether or not Cobb got to see his kids, because we've only heard their voice in the telephone and we saw their faces at the end of the movie, but that's irrelevant, because it may as well be that he didn't see them at all, because the top was still spinning, and it's been established early on in Inception that for as long as the top is still spinning, Cobb is in his dreaming state. Now, perhaps off-screen, because until the black screen interrupted the spinning top, it may have stopped spinning, but for all we know, he's still in his dreaming state because it's still spinning. But at the same time, maybe perhaps it's not whether or not the event had actually occurred that's the bottom line. What really matters is how much Cobb loves his kids, and that maybe dreams are the only place of mental refuge that Cobb can take and, feel safe in his mind. Who knows? And then another thing, in the third act of the movie, in the climax, he does go layers deep in the dream within the dream state. So perhaps he may have gone that far down that perhaps he couldn't find a way up to the real world. I don't know. That's all I have to say in regards to my interpretation of the true meaning of Inception. With technical attributes, plot, and the true meaning of the movie down, let us compare Inception to Christopher Nolan's other work in the past and future. Before we go into Christopher Nolan's portfolio, however, let's draw some similarities between Inception and, let's say, The Dark Knight and Interstellar. Like Inception, these movies incorporate parallel editing where everything is occurring all at once, and there are more cuts than you can probably count. Probably more than the infamous scene where in Bohemian Rhapsody where there have been the most cuts, and it's impossible to unsee it, but Inception is full of them. The entirety of the third act for The Dark Knight and speech at the end, regardless of where or when is seen with, let me use Harvey Dent as an example. Whatever Batman is doing, Christopher Nolan also wants to direct the audience's attention. The same goes for Inception, which I have established already in this review. But what makes Christopher Nolan's directing different with Inception compared to The Dark Knight? Well, for one, Inception is less comic booky. Inception is a lot more authentic. The concept wasn't snatched from the pages of a comic book, graphic novel, or book. It's all in Christopher Nolan's head. The same can't be said about The Dark Knight, because Christopher Nolan didn't come up with Batman in his head. Sure, he might have incorporated interesting and unique spins in the Dark Knight trilogy for the better, but the IP was more than just inspired. The Batman property was used by multiple directors before Christopher Nolan. Now, I know that some of you might be commenting, well, Makram, it's not fair to compare Christopher Nolan's Inception to The Dark Knight, if Inception wasn't the only authentic movie that he made. Lift your hand away from that keyboard for a second, please, because I'm going to now compare Inception to Interstellar. So I'm comparing one non-comic book movie with another non-comic book movie. Is that fair? Alright, great. Because after that, I'm going to compare Inception to Tenet. I would say that Inception is a lot more complex than Interstellar. Had it not been for the wormhole scene toward the end of Interstellar, since it wasn't a black hole per se, but rather a wormhole. But see, the audience can easily mistake it to be an actual black hole, since Interstellar still has complexity in it. But, on the other hand, that complexity is incomparable to, let's say, the plot of Inception, in my opinion, because you're dealing with an instance where even the protagonists are questioning their reality. The audience is questioning their own realities when watching the movie. One time, I'm going to tell you something that I found pretty hilarious, and that may have been the movie's fault. I actually had a dream that I was somehow in Inception, but I was watching Inception. So I was dreaming of watching Inception. And I thought to myself, wait. My mind was very confused because if I was dreaming of watching a movie about dreams, I don't know. That was... I almost was like, could it be that this movie impacted the audience to the extent that maybe the movie itself is a dream? I got you there or not, didn't I? In Interstellar, we know that the characters are in space. There aren't any hallucinations to be had in that movie. Whereas in Inception, until this very day, we still argue about the ending of that film. At the same time, though, and this is where I want to bring up Christopher Nolan's latest movie, Tenet, Inception is nowhere near as complex as Tenet. Like, Tenet is... I can't even review it because I'm going to have to watch it like 3 times to understand the plot of it. It is so complex that it makes you feel stupid even watching it, because it's like going to, I don't know, a science lab in, let's say, Harvard. You don't know the first thing about chemistry, okay? But then you're there anyway. You don't feel like you belong there because it's not your kind of place. Tenet is kind of like that. While Inception doesn't explore time manipulation like Tenet does, and it isn't that alienating like being in a Harvard science lab, Christopher Nolan explores dreams in Inception in a way that is half understandable, but it requires multiple interpretations to fully grasp, what is trying to be conveyed on the screen. In Tenet, however, this whole concept of inversion, where if someone's inverted, they can move backwards for an infinite amount of time. I don't want to get into the physics of all that craziness, but compared to Tenet's whole concept, Inception is nowhere near as alienating as Tenet. My point of all of the comparisons, by the way, in case you want to know how that relates to the review, is that Inception is a movie that showcases Christopher Nolan's directing ability to regulate the level of complexity in his packed storylines, compressed into a movie of the industrial time length of the average movie. Because he's not going to make a 4 hours movie explaining those concepts. He's going to leave it as is. With all of these down, Inception's parallel editing and the attributes of Inception's storytelling method, how the film's plot stands out to the average movie-going audience, the true meaning of Inception, and the comparison of Inception with Christopher Nolan's other work, past and future, the Cinema Courtroom contends that Inception is a movie to be enjoyed by the average moviegoer who is seeking out an exotic spectacle. Court is adjourned. You may be seated. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we begin to approach what Pippin loves to call second breakfast, aka the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show, which is the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. In the first half of the Cinema Courtroom, we reviewed Inception, which is one of many films that I have carefully selected, old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. Then, in the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show, I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general, movie news and movie-relevant subject matters that aren't just limited to one specific movie and integrated into one post-sentencing hearing list. Think of it as an after-party that is long overdue, perhaps, where you are invited. Yes, you, the awesome listener tuning in to this podcast. Or, in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial in order to rectify an unfair hearing. Because sometimes, or all of the time really, like the organic sapien that I am, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So, the majority of the time, or all the time, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two of the content, which means I am compelled to review this content again in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show, because that would mean that you've listened to the entire first half where I reviewed Inception in all of its glory. If you enjoy what you've heard in the first half and what I'm about to say in the second half, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate it if you give this podcast a reshare and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up or heart icon on whatever platform that you're listening on. Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. This way you will indeed be supporting the Cinema Courtroom as well as its future episodes, installments, and assets. That being said, I salute you in advance for your generous engagement and support, and I hope you continue to join us in the ride to success as you're already assisting this channel's growth, and I couldn't be any more grateful for that. In this hearing, we are going to cover the following: Patty Jenkins alluding to a possible Wonder Woman 4 installment, Ezra Miller filming new scenes for DC's upcoming movie The Flash amid PR disaster, and to finish it off, a ruthless Santa being portrayed by David Harbour in the upcoming film Violent Night.
My name is Captain Steve Trevor, pilot, American Expeditionary Forces, serial number 8141921. That's all I'm at liberty to... Assigned to British intelligence. What the hell is this thing?
The lasso of Hestia compels you to reveal the truth.
But it's really hot.
What is your mission?
Whoever you are in more danger than you think.
What is your mission?
I am a spy! I'm a spy.
This news is coming fresh from Screen Rant. It turns out that even though Wonder Woman 3 hasn't begun filming yet, with of course Gal Gadot starring as Diana Prince, here is what Patty Jenkins said. And so, where I said that I was only going to do one, then oh my god, I have to do two. And then I find myself saying, oh my god, I'm antsy to do 3. And so even now I say that's it, because I always plan a 3-movie arc. There is a story that goes through these 3 different movies. But even now, I just wrote last week the final scene of Wonder Woman 3. Now that's quite interesting. Continuing on. And I thought I might be interested to see what happens next. So you'll never know. They have asked us to think of ways to do more, and it accidentally happens. Quote, quote, accidentally. But you'll never know. I have a lot of other films that I'm excited to do as well, and I love Gal Gadot. So that makes it better too. Patty Jenkins' words. Alright, now, that was a long quote. Sorry if I couldn't read it any faster, or if I went, too slow, or whatever. But what we've just learned from it now is that Patty Jenkins is considering doing a 4th Wonder Woman installment, right? And if that is hypothetically the case, then Wonder Woman 4 would actually be the first DCEU movie to have a 4th solo movie. And that is really interesting, because only a director who has immense passion for a trilogy would even remotely dare to attempt to upgrade it to a potential franchise level. It's old news to say that Patty Jenkins adores the Wonder Woman IP. She loves Gal Gadot, of course, and she also loves Chris Pine, which is why she brought him back as Steve Trevor in Wonder Woman 84 for his second round of acting, which is pretty interesting because it erased Steve Trevor's character arc in the first Wonder Woman and his whole sacrifice, as well as the impact of his sacrifice in Zack Snyder's Justice League. Needless to say that there is no question about Patty Jenkins' admiration for Wonder Woman. At the same time, for someone like Patty Jenkins to express an interest in doing a Wonder Woman 4, one might suppose that a director of 3 movies would be interested in taking a break from it for a while, and then consider doing a 4th movie. Another thing, it would be a very bold decision for Warner Brothers to greenlit a Wonder Woman 4 at this current time. And I'm saying this because you have to keep in mind that the studio hasn't greenlit anything. It's just Patty Jenkins spouting a notion. If Warner Brothers sets aside a budget for Wonder Woman 4, it would be a risky venture since they are unaware of the likelihood of if the third one is going to be successful or if it's going to lean towards failure, because we haven't even started making it yet. They've only seen the basic draft of the script, I'd assume, and it's still in pre-production. You literally heard from the quote that Patty Jenkins just finished writing the last scene for Wonder Woman 3. What if, and God forbid, Wonder Woman 3 flops, and by the time the studio has reached that epiphany, they're pumping out money for a next installment? It's essentially like throwing eggs at the box office dragon, which is basically when a movie doesn't perform well, but the studio is adamant in producing those movies anyway. Hint, hint, Fast and the Furious. So, I mean, who knows? A Wonder Woman 4 would be a nice idea in my opinion, I guess. But whether or not it would be anything more, then that's reliant on how well the upcoming 3rd installment performs, which we won't know until a very distant future. Because, as I've mentioned, Wonder Woman 3 has to start shooting and then be in the post-production stage, as well as, test screen to an audience before we can make our own evaluations and judgment. The question for the viewers listening to this podcast now is, what is your evaluation and judgments? Do you think that Wonder Woman 4 should be a possibility to begin with at this early stage? Patty Jenkins apparently thinks that it does, but I don't know. Do you agree with her? And while you're at it, let me know what you think of Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 84. Whatever it is that you think about, any of my questions, feel free to answer in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.
My foot's in the door.
This is like a job, Joe.
Job.
Your foot's in the door.
Isn't that a thing people say?
Your foot's in the door. Yeah, that's something people say, man. His foot's in the door. That's my boy right there. Told him nothing he knows.
Dad, you're gonna get maced again.
If we can go one damn week without Ezra Miller and Flash-related news, I would actually be very let down. What, you expected me to say, I'm sick of the Flash news. I want to talk about something else. No, listen, believe it or not, I do carry a level of amusement when it comes to this particular subject matter. That and it strokes my ego to have a bit of a moral high ground for once. I can finally be in a place to say, how dare Ezra Miller choke that woman? Or throw that chair in a nightclub? Or burglarize a home in Vermont? All I ever did was a few times, mind you, use music that had apparently been under a copyright embargo. Keyword, apparently. I didn't know, okay? I thought I was allowed to use that track because it said I could. But no, apparently I'm committing murder for accidentally not passing the copyright drug test. Like what, you want me to piss in it or something? Okay, and at first, that was the worst thing one could possibly do. Because how dare I practice fair use and not make a profit from it? Until Ezra Miller kept returning to the headlines. I am joking, by the way, a joke that might have dragged on for a tad too long, but you know me. That's who I am. And of course, I'm not a celebrity, but Ezra Miller is. He plays the role of a popular DC character in Speedster called The Flash in the 4-hour Zack Snyder Justice League movie. Now, according to the latest report from the Flash News Twitter account, Ezra Miller has reportedly filmed new scenes for The Flash as a part of the movie's latest batch of reshoots. As if I hadn't made it clear in the opening of this topic already, Ezra Miller, The Flash, and Warner Brothers are dealing with a PR disaster and have been struggling with it for a good many months now. Needless to say, if Ezra Miller is referenced in at least one thing, a majority of the pop culture crowd is not going to want to hear the end of it, because they detest Ezra Miller with every fiber of their being. They want him to cut ties with Warner Brothers, and I can see why that is unfortunately the case. But something that is noticeable about this report of Ezra Miller returning for reshoots is not what many people might think. That it somehow indicates that Warner Brothers wants to continue or extend their partnership with Ezra Miller. Where people are like, hey, why is Warner Brothers doing this? Isn't Ezra Miller done? Didn't he commit all of those atrocities? Like, what's wrong with you? But if we let go of this, twisted version of events, let's just look at the reality of the situation. Ezra Miller is contracted for the Flash movie, and there's no confirmation that he'll be in any project past that movie. There's no proof whatsoever. If anything, I think Warner Brothers will finally be able to put this PR nightmare behind them, and they're not going to have it repeated again. And the only way that can hypothetically not be repeated again is if Ezra Miller is unemployed from Warner Brothers for good. That's one thing people have to possess a basic comprehension of before they hop on the bandwagon and say that, oh, Warner Brothers endorses Ezra Miller's behavior. Warner Brothers wants to keep Ezra Miller in their endeavors. That's not the case. Or at least there's no proof that it's the case. Because all there is baseless assumptions. Just because, the movie is still called The Flash. So, of course, The Flash is going to come back to do reshoots. Duh. And it's not like Warner Brothers can just recast Ezra Miller either. The movie is done. It's locked. You sabotage an existing cut of a picture by recasting Ezra Miller, which spells a literal recipe for disaster that exceeds just PR. It can result in a quality disaster, an economic disaster even, because, ticket sales might decrease due to negative word of mouth. Because let's say recasting Ezra Miller hinders the quality of the movie. Well, maybe the box office might, have a considerable amount of figures, but then in the second weekend, there will be people being like, hey, this new actor playing the Flash sucks. And I'm not talking about Grant Austin. I doubt they're going to put him in a movie. So then they're going to tell their granny, we're going to tell their cat, dogs, pigeons, they'll tell them, listen, this movie wasn't very good. We should have just kept Ezra Miller. As much as a PR pain in the ass that he was, it was the right thing to do, instead of just recast him in the middle of a picture lock. So that won't do good for Warner Brothers in the long run. Sure, it might give consolation to some Ezra Miller sensitive people out there, but what's it going to do for the movie in the long run? Little to nothing beneficial. And it's not like the studio would be weeding out a garden by recasting Ezra Miller anyway. Ezra Miller is one big tree, okay? Removing Ezra Miller would be cutting down that one and only tree. Analogy aside, The Flash is expected to release in global cinemas everywhere, assuming it doesn't get delayed again, in 2023. We're at the point now where Warner Brothers has to hear the words Chop chop, Adam Machete. You got a movie to wrap production on. Sad truth. But who knows? There might be multiple dimensions to this report that I failed to take into consideration yet. And if that is truly the case, or you have something you want to share about this report of The Flash and Ezra Miller reshoots, let me know what you think about it. Is it too late to recast Ezra Miller? Is it adequate to presuppose that The Flash is still going to have a difficult time recovering from this back-breaking PR mess? Whatever it is that you think, let me know in the comments section below or a Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Links are in the description below. There is an upcoming film coming out on December 2nd this year, Violent Night, and it has a very questionable premise, which reads: when a team of mercenaries breaks into a wealthy family compound on Christmas Eve, taking everyone inside hostage, the team isn't prepared for a surprise combatant. Santa Claus, played by David Harbour, who's also in Black Widow and Stranger Things, is on the grounds, and he's about to show why this Nick is no saint. Alright, so we have the basic groundwork of Violent Night laid right in front of our very eyes. Santa Claus, who, as you just heard, is being played by David Harbour, will be applying stormy methods in his determination to eradicate mercenaries. And I think I know where we are headed with this. The prospect is rather simple. Santa, unlike the unwarlike way that he is portrayed in most Christmas-centered portrayals in the media, has now broken bad. See what I did there? Because he's bald, has a beard, up to no good, Breaking Bad? No? Okay, moving on. I apologize if you didn't get the joke. You're on a naughty list. So anyway, by the way, I'm not like David Harbour Santa in Violent Night. I'm not actually going to stab you if you're on a naughty list. Just had to clear that out first. Before, I get sued for any potential, insurance damages or something. So anyway, I just want to talk about another thing that I noticed in the official trailer for Violent Night, and that you might have also taken a glance at. Santa can be seen stabbing someone with a Christmas star. And on top of that, there is even a naughty list of villains that Santa is not going to hesitate to kill or injure, which means you better straight up and wiggle your way in whatever room there is available on the Goody Two-Shoes list, because I can guarantee you that you don't want to get stabbed by a Christmas star that you've probably fought when you were like 6 years old to put on the tree. Look, Mommy, I want to put the star on the Christmas tree. It's my turn. But now, in the case of Violent Night, you better avoid that star on the Christmas tree at all costs. Mommy, keep the star away from me. I don't want to touch it. I just want to share my quick 2 cents for Violent Night. I think that we are living in a day and age of cinema where transforming a kid's childhood idol, such as Winnie the Pooh, into a daunting and savage figure has become radicalized to the brim. I do think that while obviously those new adaptations can't be watched by underage children, Mommy, can I watch Violent Night? No. From a creative storytelling perspective, coming up with a dark take of an existing childhood icon is the mitochondria of the sheer level of creative power that every screenplay writer needs to have equipped with them at all times. There's obviously a permanent DNA embedded in IPs such as Barney the Dinosaur, Thomas the Tank Engine, and of course, Santa Claus. But what if you could come up with a way to alter that DNA and create something new and convincing from the ground up? Something that will squander the average moviegoer's consciousness and challenge their own perceptions of who Santa Claus is. I don't mean just give Father Christmas a machine gun and oh no, he's all of a sudden this nuanced character. No, like anyone in the 3rd grade can do that. It's edgy, but it's mostly just noise, not real storytelling. What I mean by new and convincing, though, I think Violent Night has the potential to do this very well, is that the first to third act of the movie will engage the audience and explain to them why Violent Night deserves a seat at the cinema table. I expect Violent Night to be the leading apologist of the discourse whenever it comes down to dark tales of childhood icons and popular figures. And it also comes down to the very roots of the following message. Even a man who polices naughty and nice can fall short sometimes. If Santa Claus can be a little naughty, what is to stop all of us from breaking bad as well? Santa is meant to set a precedent, right? He's meant to show kids an example of how to behave. Well, I'm not sure stabbing someone with a Christmas star is a right way to go. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm going to pass the question down to you, the listeners of this podcast. What do you think about the prospect of Violent Night? I think it's pretty interesting. I might want to watch it. Is it something that you approve of in particular? Do you have any reservations? Perhaps you might be a concerned parent. Let's say we saw a poster in the mall, and then your kid asks, hey, what's this movie about? Santa isn't violent, and then you have to explain to them that it's fiction. Well, I'm not going to ruin the magic for you, so I'm just going to move on. Whatever it is that you think, let me know in the comment section below, or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. We have now, at long last, reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom Show, where we critiqued movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed episode 17 of the Cinema Courtroom, just as I do every week making these episodes. I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, where we're going to talk about, yet again, another movie. As for what movie it's going to be, that's yet to be determined. Find out when the next and 18th episode of the Cinema Courtroom Show launches this coming Friday on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and the Amazon Music platform. Also, I have a little update to share with you guys before I close this off. Next Tuesday, not this coming Friday, next Tuesday, I will be doing a discussion on Black Adam. So it's going to be divided into non-spoilers, because by the time that episode's going to be out, there will still be a considerable amount of you who haven't seen Black Adam. So I'm going to split it into a non-spoiler segment and then full-on spoiler review in the segment after it. This way, you know, that it can be more inclusive to every viewer out there who's interested in hearing my insights on Black Adam. But that's not coming this Friday. Again, next Tuesday. This coming Friday, we're going to do another movie, which I hope you join me for. Thank you once again for listening to the end. I'm your Galactic Judge, Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular day.
Hello there.
Court is now dismissed.